Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today in this stream where I talk about myself. So this is basically an introduction to who I am and what my path to game development was. So I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Cory, and this is what I look like in real life. You may have seen me in streams before or heard my voice in tutorial videos. You've probably seen me on Discord. I'm Cory on there. I have the frog icon. And I answer questions in the Discord pretty frequently. So that's who I am. And I'm not sure, but some of you may be thinking, I look a little familiar. You may have seen this photo in the bottom right before. This kind of like snapshot of like a younger person who's named Cory, and it says Cory Game Maker. And that photo is used in some promotional materials for Endless Studios. And that is because before I worked here, and before I worked at Eline Media, which was the company that kind of birthed Endless Studios, I was at a youth game making camp, kind of similar to this program. It was a summer camp that they hosted. And so I was a participant who was learning about game development and how to make games and doing kind of that workshop-y educational aspect of it before I actually got a job here. So who is this guy? How did this happen? So quick facts about me. I am currently a game design mentor at Endless Studios. I'm here to help you guys learn about game design, help with any questions that you have about our program and about how to use the website. I am also studying game design professionally at Digipen Institute of Technology, which is a college in the United States in Washington. And they focus on kind of interactive media. So they have art programs, they have programming, computer science kind of stuff, and they also have game design. They're one of the most well-known schools here for game design. So I graduate next year. I'm excited about that. And I'm a senior, so this is my last year. I also have worked at Eline Media and Endless Studios as a design intern, kind of on and off for the past 3 years or so. As I said, I went to the summer camp as a student in high school, and I was offered an internship after that. So I interned kind of the next year, and then I went to college. And when I came back over summer break, I interned again, and same deal. I've kind of just been working as a part-time job on and off over the course of the past few years. And finally, probably like all of you, I love games of all kinds. There's a lot of genres that I play. I try to play a little bit of everything, but I especially like RPGs and top-down adventure games. So some of my favorite games, you might recognize a few of these titles. Portal 2 was actually the game that got me into video games. Huge fan of Portal. I think that game's a masterpiece. And some of these other games were kind of further steps along my journey to just having an interest in video games. So Dragon Age series, I love that kind of role-playing. Horizon Zero Dawn is a newer title that I have enjoyed. I haven't played the second one yet. I'm excited to get into that when I get a chance. Red Dead Redemption 2, I think, is fantastic. I've also played the first one. But I also I try to play a lot of indies if I can. So Hades, of course, is amazing. Hyper Light Drifter, I love. FTL is kind of the odd one out on this screen because it's not a role-playing game. It's a top-down strategy roguelike, but I think it's lots of fun. It's really interesting. Lots of chaos can happen. So those are some of my favorites, but like I said, I try to play a little bit of everything. So feel free to chat in the Discord if you want to talk about some of these that you've also played or like recommend me some titles. I'm always down for that. So how I got into games, I grew up with games, probably like many of you. My first console was actually the Nintendo Wii, which is like, the family console. So I grew up playing games on the Wii with my parents and my sister. And later I got into PC gaming. So Valve was actually the first major game developer that I played their games. Like I said, I played Portal and Portal 2, and I just fell in love with it. But I also played a little bit of Half-Life and Team Fortress 2, and later got into other like first-person shooters and role-playing games on the PC. And when I finished Portal 2 in like a day after getting it, that's when I knew I wanted to be a game designer. And I knew that I wanted to create experiences that were that powerful and interactive, but also funny and tell a story, because I think that games as an art form are just really like powerful. So When I was about that age and I decided I want to make video games, my mom sat me down and said, you should look at what the positions are at that company that made that game, so at Valve, what the positions of game designers are and what they have to do to become game designers. So I went on their website and I looked and I found like level designer, and here's the requirements to be a level designer. And then I did lots more research about what it would take for me to become a game designer. So in high school, I attended local game development workshops, including the one with Eline Media, which later kind of turned into Endless Studios. And that's when I met a bunch of other folks around my age who were interested in game design. But I also met the games industry veterans who were working at Eline Media, and made a lot of really good connections that way. So I learned a little bit about programming and art and how to use Unity. That was really my first introduction to how to implement things in Unity, because that's kind of a big hurdle. Some of you are familiar with Unity a little bit, but at first, when you don't know anything about game engines, it's kind of tricky to get into that. I had messed around a little bit on my own, but Eline Media at that summer camp, they taught me a little bit more about how to use that game engine, and that was a really important step. And of course, then they later offered me the internship, so that got me a big connection into this industry. I also attended another summer camp, similarly, that was hosted by a local public university here. So attending these camps and workshops helped me get some of that groundwork in of what are the fundamentals of this industry, what kind of tools am I going to be using? And I also met a lot of good people, some of whom I'm still in contact with today. So the other thing that I did when I was in high school was I took programming classes. I actually went to a local community college and took classes while I was in high school. So I learned C# that way. I took a couple of levels of C# in college. And I also experimented just on my own time with Unity game engine and also Twine. Twine is a free game-making tool specifically for text-based games. So if you've ever played like a text-based adventure where it's just you read a passage like you wind up in the woods, there's a path to the left and a path to the right. Which one do you choose? That kind of stuff. So I started making a game in Twine. I never finished it, but I still think it's a really good experience if you're interested in that kind of narrative storytelling through games. So it's a fun tool to use for that. And then after I graduated from high school, I went on to college. So I applied to Digipen Institute of Technology, like I said. Unfortunately, I got accepted. So I chose to study there because, as I said before, it's one of the top schools for game design in the United States. So it has a reputation and a lot of graduates who've gone on to all kinds of games companies. Notably, Nintendo kind of has a partnership with Digipen, and a lot of Digipen grads have wound up at Nintendo. So I have learned a lot at Digipen. It's been overall a pretty good experience for me, and I've learned stuff from C# programming for games, more specifically, because when I was in community college and I took my introductory C# classes, they weren't teaching for games specifically. That was just kind of an introduction to the language. But at Digipen, I've learned lots of in-depth programming techniques for how to program for games, how to make scripts for Unity games specifically. I've learned all kinds of stuff about design and what makes games fun. How do we balance these systems to make them feel good? How do we polish a game and add lots of feedback and visuals and audio to make it just feel like a really tight, immersive experience? That kind of stuff, it's easy to think about. And often as game players, we think about that passively as we're playing games. Like, I like it when it feels like this. I love when games have this kind of feature. But when you're designing games, you have to think really critically about that stuff. And there's a lot of principles for how to make it good that it's really valuable to learn from professionals who've been doing it for a long time. I've also learned about digital art production. I took coursework to learn how to make 2D art and 3D art for games. And I've also learned a little bit about game audio implementation and production a little bit too. So how to make or find sound effects and music for games, and how to implement those in Unity with C# scripting. So I've also worked on a lot of games while I've been at school at Digipen. One of the really cool things about Digipen is that it puts you from freshman year in game teams with other students. So you make games together. And that's one of the really valuable things is you make a lot of different game projects over the course of your education. So I've worked on more than 10 student game titles at Digipen. Some of these are Hip Hoppity, which was a 2D rhythm side scroller game. I was the producer and also level designer on this game. Basically, it's like an auto running side scroller where you're moving, you're jumping, you're sliding to the beat of the music. And so that was a lot of fun to work on. I really like that concept, and I think it came out looking really stylish. Another project that I've worked on more recently is Anesthesia, which is a 3D puzzle horror game where you play as a little girl in this nightmarish, vaporwavy hospital dreamscape. It's really like surreal and funky, very visually interesting, I think, and creepy. But it has kind of a touching story under there too. So that was fun to work on this game. I was actually the UI designer, UI UX designer. So I made like the menus and the interfaces for like when you pick something up, or the prompts for when you approach a door and it says you can open the door. Stuff like that I worked on. I also worked to hook up some of the systems like the inventory and also make sure that the feedback systems were in place for some of the mechanics like the IV pole, which has kind of like an energy meter in it that you can see in the GIF down there. I've also worked on solo projects where it was just me developing them. One of these was Shield of Self-Care, which is a 2D boss rush Pong-inspired action experience. The idea, I was thinking like, I like brick breaker games, Pong games. They're really, really simple. But what if it was kind of like Cuphead, where you had bosses that you were fighting by deflecting balls at them? So that was kind of that concept. That was a lot of fun to work on. It's also got a little bit of a story to it. Another game that I worked on was Kaiju Carnage, which is a 3D action game, which I thought of as kind of a fusion of Spore and the Rampage series, where the idea is you build your own like comic book kaiju monster, and then you play that monster and destroy a city as fast as you can. So that was a lot of fun. There was a lot of like comic inspired visuals with that project. So that was really fun to work on. So one of the big questions that people have for game design, and especially getting into this industry, is getting a degree in game design worth it? For me personally, yes. So one of the things that's really nice about going to a college or university to learn game design, which more and more universities are adding programs for game design. One of the nice things about that is you get a professional quality education, which is better than just watching tutorials on YouTube. You can teach yourself game design. You can learn how to do a lot of things through YouTube, but you can't make connections with people who have been in the industry doing this work for years and years, which you can at a college. So at Digipen, most of the professors are actually real game designers and programmers and artists who have worked in the industry for a number of years before they became teachers. And some of them are still actually working part-time in the industry as well as teaching. So you have those connections, and some of the teachers can be like, hey, I actually know this person who works at Bungie or Nintendo. You want to like meet for coffee or something like that? Like those connections that you make with your professors are really, really valuable. You also get lots of hands-on experience making games on a team as well as by yourself. So you can, in 4 years, just by yourself, choose to make like 15 different game projects. You can totally do that. But I find that it's really useful to have the structure of a class with assignments and also lots of other people your age trying to do the same thing, that is structured in a way that kind of forces you to make those projects and make different kinds of projects and work with other people. And I think that's valuable because you get a lot of experience actually making games. And doing this, you build a decent portfolio of work that you've made, things that you've done working with other people, working by yourself, in order to showcase your skills that you've learned over the 4 years of your education. And it also looks good on a resume, because if you have a degree in game design, when you're applying to jobs, then that shows the employer that you have the dedication to study this field for 4 years. You have the skills that you've learned to further your ability to work in that field. And so it looks good because it means you're dedicated, and presumably that you have built these skills for 4 years. So it is expensive, especially Digipen. It's pricey, and sometimes the curriculum can be tough. There's a lot of things that I just didn't know, and there's a lot of coursework that is really challenging because there's no like universal right way to make a game. So you have to be thinking critically about things all the time, and working really hard. But in my opinion, it is worth it if you're serious about game design as a career, or related fields like art, audio, programming, things like that. So for me personally, it's been worth it. And I think it is a good idea if you're serious about this industry. So some questions that I get a lot are, do you have advice for beginner game devs, people who are interested in making games, but don't really know where to start? I do. So one thing is there's lots of tutorials online that you can follow for all kinds of things related to game design, and plenty of stuff on YouTube to help you get started. So my advice is follow these tutorials to try and make really, really simple games, like make copies of really simple older games even. Like try to make Pong, try to make Frogger. It's a really good idea to keep your focus simple and small at first, because let's face it, if you're a beginner game dev and you don't have any experience, or you have very limited experience in Unity or Unreal, whatever engine you're using, you're not going to be able to make a AAA RPG. It's just not going to happen. And even for like me as an experienced game developer, a person who's been studying game design, who's worked in game design for a few years now, I can't make that by myself. It takes a lot of skill, a lot of manpower, a lot of hours to make that kind of thing. And it's really overwhelming to set yourself up for something that complicated when you're just a beginner. So I would recommend start simple. Try to make really simple games at first. One of the very first tutorials that I followed for Unity is how to roll a ball. So you made like a very small arena and a sphere, a ball, and you make a controller that can roll that ball around, and that's it. That's all there was. And that helps me learn a little bit about how to implement movement in Unity. So I think it's useful to try and do that sort of thing. Also, put any game you make in a portfolio. Save all your work. It's really valuable for people to see your experience in this industry and to see that you have made games. Like one of the things that employers will ask for and look for in job applications is, what games have you made? What have you actually done? And so even if you're just a beginner and you're making really simple stuff, keep that and keep it in a place where you can go back to it and take video or screenshots or whatever. And also save it in a group, like a portfolio. You can even just have a folder with this stuff, but it's also really good to have a page on like itch.io or something like that if you want to publish your games, or if you want to make your own website, which is really approachable these days with free sites like Wix or Weebly. So any game that you make, put it in a portfolio, save it. It's always good to show that you have been working on games. It's also useful for applying to schools. Like when I applied to Digipen, I had to give them a portfolio of stuff that I'd done. It didn't all have to be game design, but it did have to showcase kind of critical design thinking. So when I applied, my portfolio was a cosplay that I had designed and made from scratch. I cosplayed Lucio from Overwatch. So I talked about how I made that costume, and I uploaded pictures of that. I had made a game project with Eline Media at that summer camp, actually, which was it was a racer game, which I think you guys are just starting now. So I uploaded my video of our racer game mod that we made. And the other thing, what was it? I can't remember what the last thing. It was like 3 things you had to upload for your portfolio. I don't remember the last one. But that sort of stuff that showcases that you have design critical thinking skills. Anyway, third point of advice, play lots of games in different genres. So that was something that I was talking about. I try to play as many games as I can. And I think it's really important to just broaden your horizons, even with games that you wouldn't normally play. So if you've never played a strategy game before, try playing one, see what it's like, see what you like about it, see what you don't. Because it's important to be exposed to a lot of different kinds of game mechanics if you want to be a game designer. This is for a few reasons. One is inspiration. There's plenty of times when I've played a game and maybe it wasn't for me, but maybe there was one thing about it that I really liked or thought was interesting and thought maybe I could take that for myself and try to make something kind of similar. Or what if you combined this mechanic from this game with this totally different mechanic from a different game? Stuff like that. It's nice to be able to draw inspiration from lots of places. Another reason that it's good is as a game designer, when you're trying to build a game concept, and especially when you're trying to explain that to other people, we like to have comparables, which are games that are similar to what we're talking about, to be able to draw comparisons and talk about how this concept is similar to an existing product. So it's useful to have played a lot of different games so that you can go, oh, you know what, this concept that I'm trying to explain, it's a lot like how this other game that you might have played also does it. So we do that all the time in game design, which is why it's useful to make time for yourself to just play lots of games. And again, in different genres, play as much as you can. So another thing that I would highly recommend is going to local game workshops or expos or conventions. This was something that I did, and that's actually how I found out about the Eline Media game summer workshop in the first place. I was at a local comic convention, and there were flyers for this summer camp thing that people were handing out, and so I took one, and then I wound up going to that camp. So look up online to see if there's any local conventions for fans of video games and go to that. See if there's panels where people talk about video games. Sometimes game designers from the industry will come and give talks at those kinds of things. So it's valuable to get that kind of experience that way. Another thing is expos like PAX, which are they're meant for showing new game products and for fans to come and see what's in the works and get their hands on demos and things like that. They also have panels where people talk about games. And so I think it's a good idea to go to those things because you find out about more opportunities like workshops that you can go to. You find people who work in that industry and people who are also fans and make those kind of connections. So that was a really valuable experience for me. I still like to go to conventions and things like that. And as you get more into the industry, there are even professional level conventions like GDC, the Game Developers Conference, which I went to this year. It's a yearly convention where people from the industry all over come together to give talks about their experiences and insights in the industry that they've learned. And it's a really valuable networking and learning experience. Final piece of advice, try making mods for existing games that you like. So this is one that I've actually heard from game industry professionals who are looking for new hires. Something that they really like to see is people making mods for existing games. So, for example, a lot of Bethesda games like Skyrim or Fallout, if you make a mod for this that's like a quest or a level, one specific area for Fallout 4 or something like that, that's really good for employers to see because one, it shows that you're familiar with their products, and two, it shows that you have the design thinking and the dedication to implement and make your own game content, which is, of course, what game designers do. So it's a really good idea to make mods for stuff. And lots of games give you tools to do this outright. Like, for example, Portal 2 has a level editor built into it. So you can make your own Portal 2 levels and you can publish those on the Steam Workshop. So I highly recommend if you have a game that has the ability for you to make mods for it, try doing that. Try making your own content for it. And lastly, since you all are participants in Endless Studios, you're already doing great. This is a great first step to take if you're interested in any field or any part of the field of game development. So good job. Kudos to you guys. this is a great first step. So if you guys have any more questions for me, feel free to ask away in the chat. And here's my contact info. If you guys want to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn. If you want to contact me separately, you can email me or you can text me on Discord. I'm on there pretty often, and you can feel free to DM me or you can just post in the regular channels. I also included a link to my portfolio here if you guys want to look at the other game projects that I've worked on. So does anyone have any more questions for me? All right, so I'll wait a bit more for questions, but while I'm waiting, let's think, what else could I talk about relating to my career? Another game project that I've worked on recently is called Pond Scum. It's a isometric, kind of top-down 3D action RPG. That sounds complicated. It's kind of similar perspective to Hades, where it's like that top-down isometric view, but it's actually 3D. It's not 2D art. And basically the story is you are like a little frog guy in this amphibious society, kind of fantasy society. And you're part of a nation that is warring with another amphibious nation in the same pond. And you've been sent on a mission to go and kill their queen and come back to your people. But it's actually got kind of a heartfelt story about learning about other people and accepting differences, and not being a colonizer. So that was fun to work on. It was really challenging, though, for me to develop the quest system for that game. So quest systems actually have a lot more complexity than you might think. And when I was making that game, I had to set up the system for what kind of different quests are there going to be. So there are quests where you have to defeat a certain number of enemies. There are quests where you have to go and talk to a specific NPC. There's quests where you have to do one of those things in order for something else to happen, and then you get a different quest. And what I noticed is when you're setting up a quest system, a lot of what quests are is one event that links to another event. So something happens, and then something else happens because of that. So I had to make the system flexible enough to where when a dialogue happens, I could have that be an event that a quest happens then. Or when you defeat a certain enemy, then a quest happens. So it was a lot of like figuring out where to expose events in the code, and what events I needed in order to have the quest system feel correct. And I also had to make sure that I had those hooked up to UI elements. So the way that I chose to do it was I had kind of a label in the upper right of the screen where it said like current quests, and it would have the title of the quest and the goal of the quest and the progress of the quest. So a little bit similar to quest interfaces in games like The Witcher or World of Warcraft even. So that was what I chose to do. And I had to make sure that every time a quest was progressed, it would update the UI, and the UI would show what quests you had, and that when you finish a quest, it would go away. And there's a lot to keep track of. So quests are like really, really cool. That's something that I enjoy as a player a lot, and I like making as a designer. But there's a lot more that goes into a quest system than you might think. That's my takeaway from that project. So I'm going to check once again for questions. All right. So it looks like no questions at this time, but feel free if you come up with questions later, or if you watch this later and then have a question for me, shoot me a question on the Discord. Feel free to chat about stuff that I talked about in the Discord channels, or if you want, you can email me. But thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate learning about myself and taking the time to kind of meet me and be introduced to my path to game development. So I hope that this was helpful for you guys, or at least interesting a little bit. And thank you so much for taking the time to listen.